Chapter 15, Getting Away with Murder. John Calhoun Swofford was born in June 1858 and was 77 years old when he was killed by Church Lester on September the 2nd, 1935. Calhoun first married Nanny Cox, and they had one child, James Aaron Wendy Jim, born June 27, 1881. Nanny died in 1882 when her son was only 8 months old. Calhoun then married Sarah Christine Tucker, and they had 3 children. Thomas Edward, born October the 5th, 1890, Aaron Jack, born July 1893, and Janice, born June of 1896. Sarah died October the 9th, 1898. Calhoun then married Maddie Matilda Greer on September the 10th, 1899, and they had 6 children. Olin B., born September 19, 1900, Camelira, born February the 10th, 1903, Nanny, born June the 12th, 1905, Lawrence Leon, born June the 14th, 1908, Willie Louise Billy, born May 31st, 1913, and an unnamed child who died at birth. Calhoun's third wife, Maddie, was living when he was killed. She died 34 years later on December the 17th, 1969. Calhoun's daughter-in-law, Lorene Swofford, said at the time of Calhoun's death that he owned 275 acres of land. Most of it was valley land, with his home located on East Valley Road. Lorene now lives in this house and owns the property, which goes all the way up the mountain to Porch Rock Road, including 12 acres on the east side of Porch Rock. Calhoun was a son of Aaron Swofford and grandson of Thomas Swofford Sr., the founder of Swofford Chapel. At the time of this killing, Church was living with Evelyn Lee Lude Solomon in his home, located on what is now the road to the ABC subdivision. Church and Evelyn weren't married at this time. However, they did marry 6 months later. Evelyn's sister, Flora, was living with them. Evelyn and Flora's brother, Loy Solomon, lived nearby and worked for Church making liquor. Their parents were Danny and Elizabeth Kitty Solomon. Calhoun was running cattle on the open range on Walden's Ridge, and he had hired Coleman Johnson to look after them. Calhoun and Coleman were spending a lot of time in the house when Church, Evelyn, and Flora were living. According to several sources, Calhoun was allegedly having an affair with Flora at Church's home. Calhoun was a 77-year-old man with a long white beard, and Flora was only about 17. Calhoun was said to have often taken Flora and Evelyn a sack of cornmeal up the mountain on his horse from his home in the valley, and occasionally stayed overnight in Church's house. A few days before the killing, Calhoun and Coleman started missing cattle. Calhoun suspected Church had killed his cattle and was selling the beef, but he was careful not to accuse him. One source indicated that Calhoun had fat calves on the mountain open range when Church and Loy Solomon were killing them and selling the meat in Dayton and Pikeville. 2 years earlier, Herschel Clark and Dave Yergin told that they had seen Church on separate occasions get mad and kill cattle with his pump shotgun when cattle broke through the fences. They said Church sent word to the Swoffords in the valley, "If you don't keep your cattle out of my crops, all your cattle's going to be dead." In his book, Charles Clark indicated Church became very aggravated when cattle from the valley were turned loose on the open range on the mountains, especially when the cattle started breaking his fences and getting into his crops. This happened during dry periods when grass on the open range became low. Clark said, "And those cattle would start breaking fences and going into your crops. When they did, Church, would grab a pump shotgun, an old slide action, a handful of shells, and it was already loaded. And he'd run up just as close as he could to them cattle as he could, and he'd go a-shooting for meat. He didn't care. Them cattle would tear down a fence a half a mile long, running through it." Clark didn't mention Calhoun in his retelling, and he didn't say Church killed Calhoun's cattle. Church killed Calhoun in early September. the time of the year when the weather is normally drier and pasture on the mountain is getting low. It's not known for sure whether Church did or didn't kill Calhoun's cattle. However, most people believed he probably did. The question is, if Church did kill Calhoun's cattle, did he do it because they were breaking into his crops, or did he do it for profit, or maybe both? On Monday, the evening of the killing, Calhoun, Coleman, Evelyn, Flora, and Church were at Church's home discussing the missing cattle. Someone suggested they check an area along Porch Rock Road just north of State Route 30 for signs where the cattle may have been killed. All 5 of them got into Church's car. Charlie Hancock was either with them in the car from the beginning or he was picked up later. Coleman was living in an old shack on the north side of State Route 30, across the road from where Hicks and Higgins lived later. Coleman got into the back seat so he could hide because he knew his wife would be jealous if she saw him with the 2 Solomon sisters. Evelyn later told that all 6 of them were drinking that evening. They drove a few hundred yards north of Route 30 on Porch Rock Road when Church stopped the car to check some bees working in a hollow tree. The men got out of the car. Church climbed up to the hollow tree and pulled out a cow's head, threw it on the ground, and said, "Well, here is where somebody stole a cow." The men were far enough away from the car that they could not see it. Calhoun beat Church back to the car, which apparently upset Church. As Church was returning to the car, Evelyn was chinning herself on a tree limb. All 6 of them proceeded to get in the car. Church drove a short distance from where they had stopped. As they were slowly driving away, Flora suggested to Calhoun that the 2 of them make a trip to Dayton and Chattanooga to investigate. She told Calhoun that they could talk to businessmen and people and ask who had been peddling beef. But Calhoun sternly told Flora, "No, there's no need to do that. There's no use in looking any farther." He was inferring because he knew who the thief was, and that person was in the car with him. Church knew Calhoun was insinuating that he was the guilty party. Church glared. His glare could have frozen lava. The suspense was intense. Calhoun evidently sensed he was in serious trouble, and he could tell that his statement had infuriated Church. Calhoun tried to backtrack by saying, "Church, you'd be the last person I would suspect." Church was steaming, but he kept cool. He quietly reached over between him and Evelyn and placed his hand on his .45 pistol laying in the seat between them. He kept his pistol low in the seat where Calhoun couldn't see it. Evan quietly put her hand on the pistol to try to stop him. Church was carefully watching Calhoun in his rearview mirror. He eased the gun away from Evelyn, quickly opening the car door and stepping out on the running board in order to hide the pistol in his left hand. Church, with his right foot on the running board like a flash, lifted his left leg with his pistol under his left knee, shot Calhoun first, and then Coleman as they sat in the back seat. Coleman was hit between the eyes. If Church had pre-planned the murders, he surely would have not done so in front of witnesses. Evidently, this was a passion of the moment, a decision based on his rage. Charlie Hancock was either in the car or close by, but when he heard the shots fired, he ran off through the woods. As he was running, Church shot in his direction. It was believed Church was only trying to scare Charlie and missed him on purpose. But Charlie ran so fast to get away, he was scratched from head to toe by the briars in the woods. When the authorities later asked Charlie his version of what happened, he said, "I don't know a thing." He conveniently developed a good case of amnesia, and he wouldn't tell them anything. As soon as Church shot Calhoun and Coleman, Flora, scared to death, got out of the car and started running barefoot through the briars and over rocks in an attempt to flee the scene. Church shot in her direction. The bullet shot a little streak of hair out of her head. Flora later testified, "I felt the wind from the bullet." Church was an excellent shot, and if he was aiming at her, he would have easily killed her. Church later told Hubert Boring he shot at her hair just to see how fast she could run. He added, "The only thing I regret, it was that I didn't cut off some of Calhoun's pretty white beard to use for a shaving brush, but I did paint that beard red." Flora ran to the home of Dr. F.E. Beck, who was living nearby in the Cranwell summer home, and told some people there what had happened. Dr. Beck and others were the first on the scene to find Calhoun and Coleman shortly after they were shot. Calhoun had died instantly, but Coleman had been playing dead, hoping Church would not shoot him again. Coleman was taken to Broyles Hospital in Dayton, where he contracted pneumonia, which contributed to his death a few days later. Coleman Johnson didn't have a bad reputation. He was just helping Calhoun. In Charlie Clark's book, he states that a few months after Church's trial, he was admiring Church's .45 Army pistol. Clark quotes Church as telling him, "Yeah, by doggies, that's the gun I killed old Swofford and Johnson with. By doggies, you know, I thought I had old Johnson finished off. If I hadn't, I'd have finished him off before I left there. You know, dead men don't talk, but live men do." After the shooting, Church drove off with only Evelyn in the car. They took a back road going east toward Summer City Road. Church stopped the car and parked near the home of Sidney Clark on Summer City Road, about 3/4 of a mile north of State Route 30. Church looked at his pistol and noted he only had one bullet left. He told Evelyn, "If I had another bullet, I'd just end it all." She threw her arms around him and begged, "Please don't shoot me." He hugged her and said, "I wouldn't hurt you." The couple left the Summer City area that night and drove to their campsite on the Tennessee River in Ray County. They were good friends with a farmer who owned property on the river, and he let them use a spot on the river. Church loved to fish, and he kept a boat there. He and Evelyn, her son Carl, and their many friends often camped, fished, and partied there for 2 or 3 days at a time. Church spent most of Monday night awake on the riverbank. He was worried, very quiet, and in serious thought as to what his next move should be, and where he should be going from there. By daybreak the next morning, Evelyn became afraid that he might even kill her because he wasn't talking, and she was a witness to the killing. After deep thought and being silent for a long time, Church finally put his arm around Evelyn and said, "How would you like to get married?" Evelyn said in one split second she changed from being worried to being elevated and relieved. She immediately said, "I'd love to." They got into the car that Tuesday morning and headed toward her home. While on the way, police sighted Church's car and started chasing after him. After dropping Evelyn off, Church ditched his car and took off on foot. The authorities called in bloodhounds and trailed him, but he lost the dogs in the Harwood Bluff area, just south of Morgan Springs in Ray County, near the Bledsoe County line. He made his way back east on foot into Bledsoe County. Church hid in the woods south of Sheriff Walling's home on the south side of Route 30, where the road coming from Pikeville tops the mountain. Evelyn's brother Lois Solomon and Church were the best of friends and had the greatest trust in each other. Remember, Lloyd lived near Church's home and worked for him making whiskey. After Church dropped Evelyn off Tuesday morning, she made her way back to her brother's home. Church had asked Evelyn to tell Lloyd how he wanted to communicate with him while he was on the run from the law. There's a big rock on top of another solid rock in the woods between Lloyd's home and Route 30 they both knew very well. They had previously used this rock to communicate and called it their mailbox. Church hid in the woods near the home of Sheriff Walter Walling for most of the 3 days. Church and Lloyd never met in person because Church suspected the authorities were likely watching Lloyd. Lloyd left Church food and other items necessary for survival at designated locations near their mailbox. Church left notes in the mailbox asking Lloyd to contact a lawyer for him. Lloyd contacted Lou Pope and had Pope lined up to represent him. Church later told Evelyn that while Sheriff Walling and others were looking for him, he was hiding under some downed treetops and leaves close enough that he could hear what they were saying. He heard the sheriff say, "There must be someone helping Church. He couldn't survive up here without the help from someone." A Chattanooga Times article said that Church was hiding under some brush when Windy Jim, Lawrence, and Buell Swofford were looking for him and shooting their guns. Church later told that he was hiding high up in a tree on one occasion when Buell came along riding a horse. Church said, "I had my pistol in my hand, and I could have killed Buell easy, but I didn't." If Buell had seen Church, odds were Church would have killed Buell before Buell could have killed him. N.J. Farmer was living with his mother, America Turner, and his stepfather, Johnny Knight, on the west side of East Valley Road, at the entrance to the Smyrna church. 4 days after the killing, Church Lester went to their home sometime in the mid-morning, Friday, September the 6th, driving his early 1930 model Chevrolet. He borrowed the phone and called Sheriff Walling. Church asked him to come along and not to tell anyone. NJ and most of the men were in the field working. When they came in for lunch, they met Church, who had lunch with the family. Church was very calm and looked fine. The sheriff did as Church requested, and without telling anyone, he drove along to the home of NJ, and all the family were finishing their noon meal. They invited him to eat lunch, but he thanked them and stayed for only about 10 minutes before taking Church with him. Sheriff Walter Walling and Church were good friends. Walter was also in the whiskey business. He was a bootlegger, both before and after he was sheriff, and he may have been in the business even while he was sheriff. However, other than that, many people thought he was a good sheriff. A Chattanooga Times article indicated Walter and Church ate dinner Friday night at Church's parents' home on the mountain prior to the sheriff taking Church to the jail in Chattanooga for safekeeping. The paper didn't mention Walter had picked Church up at noon at the Johnny Knight place in the valley. It appears the two men spent the afternoon together without telling anyone in order to give them time to plot their strategy to protect Church from the Swaffords. While in jail in Chattanooga, Church told reporters he didn't run from the law after the shootings, but fled from the Swaffords because he knew they would try to kill him. During the week of September the 23rd, Church was indicted by the grand jury in Pikeville for the murder of the two men. Church was held in the Hamilton County Jail for more than 5 months from September the 6th, 1936 until February the 1st, 1937, when he was taken to Pikeville. It was reported that T.Y. Swofford and Church were good friends, and T.Y. paid the bond to get Church out of jail after he was brought to Pikeville. Several sources indicated Calhoun Swofford wasn't liked by several Bledsoe County citizens. For example, it was reported and widely believed that he mistreated his tenant farmers. Normally, the tenant farmer provided all the labor for a crop. The landowner said the tenants shared the proceeds of the harvest in the fall. Calhoun was reported to have run off several tenants just before the crop was ready to harvest, so he didn't have to share any of the proceeds from it. Also, Calhoun was reported to have often ridden his horse up to one of the tenant houses, and without getting off, he insisted that the tenant's farmer's wife draw a bucket of cold water out of the well for both him and the horse. In his book, Charles Clark didn't seem to have a very good opinion of Calhoun Swofford. He said, "The Swaffords over there were so mean." One time Clark's dad, who was a young boy at the time, found a swarm of bees in an unfenced area on the mountain and got into their hive. He said when you found them that way, they were yours. Calhoun then came along and said, "Those are my bees." Calhoun went home and got a beehive, came back and got the boy's bees in his hive, and took them to his house. Charles said his father came home crying. His Uncle Charlie asked him what was wrong and was told Calhoun took his bees. Uncle Charlie and his brother Jimmy went to Calhoun's yard with an apron, got the bees out of the hive, and walked right out of Calhoun's place with them. A short time before Calhoun was killed, he reportedly told a young man named Parker Rice that he couldn't find his sow that was about to have pigs. Parker lived on the mountain near Calhoun's land where the sow was last seen. Calhoun told Parker, "If you find my sow, I'll give you one of her pigs." Parker found the sow and took Calhoun to her. When Parker asked about the pig he was promised, Calhoun said, "I've got Coleman Johnson looking after my livestock. I don't owe you a pig." Church may have killed Calhoun because he was paying too much attention to Church's live-in girlfriend, Evelyn. It was said that Church didn't mind Calhoun seeing Flora, but he didn't want him cutting in on Evelyn, who was considered the more attractive sister. After Church died, Evelyn reportedly told a family member that Calhoun had molested her. Some speculated Calhoun may have been trying to get Church sent to prison for cattle rustling just to get him out of the house so he could have a better chance with Evelyn. Calhoun's grandson, Buell Swofford, was reported to have been making threats about what he was going to do to Church for killing his grandfather. Several people told Church about the threats, which didn't seem set well with him. While Church was out of bond, prior to his trial, He knew Buell was driving a gravel truck for the county road department. One morning, Church went off the mountain to the county rock crusher on East Valley Road, north of Pikeville, with his .45 pistol. He asked Les Keener where Buell was. Keener was very well of the threats Buell had made and suspected Church had come there to kill him. Keener liked both men, and he didn't want either of them to get into trouble or to get killed. Buell had delivered a load of gravel and was due back to the rock crusher at any time, but Keener told Church that he wouldn't be back until later in the day. Without letting Church know what he was doing, Keener got into his vehicle and headed down the road to warn Buell. He stopped Buell and told him Church was waiting for him at the rock crusher with his pistol. Buell turned his truck around and drove it back to the house of his father, Windy Jim Swofford, where he left it for 3 days. Church stayed at the rock crusher nearly all day. He visited, laughing and talking with the shop workers. He even put his blacksmith skills to use by repairing their water lines while he waited for Buell to return. But Buell didn't go back to the rock crusher for several days, and he thanked Les Keener profusely for saving his life. As mentioned earlier, Dr. Beck was the first to find the bodies after the shooting. Dr. Beck became upset because the Chattanooga newspaper mentioned his name in the first article about the killings. His father knew the editor, so he got his father to write a letter to the editor requesting that they not mention his name in future articles. Dr. Beck was a close friend of Church, Charlie's, Jim Hamilton's, and Bill Rothwell, who were all in the whiskey business. Dr. Beck told Hubert Boring that Church and Charlie went to him with some time prior to the trial and cautioned him to be careful of what he said. Church asked Lewis Lou Pope to defend him in the main trial. Pope was an attorney from Pikeville who had a statewide reputation of being an excellent trial lawyer. Pope, who also was well respected, wielded considerable political influence throughout the state. He had run for governor of Tennessee twice and was narrowly defeated each time. Pope told Church, "I'll make a deal with you. If you're convicted, I won't charge you a penny. But if I get you acquitted, you'll agree to deed over to me all your property, including your home." Church didn't want to lose his home and all of his land, and tried to talk Pope into a counter deal, but Pope wouldn't budge, and Church reluctantly agreed to the proposal. Evelyn's son, Carl Solomon, said authorities placed his mother, Flora, and him in the Pikeville jail in protective custody prior to the trial. Carl was only 2 years and 8 months old, but he remembered the several days spent in jail. He remembered Black Archie and other jail employees giving him Kool-Aid and other items. Church was in lockdown in the bullpen on the lower floor of the jail, and the 2 women and boys were in the room on the second floor on the other side of the building. Evelyn and Flora weren't allowed to communicate with or have any contact with Church, however. They worked out a system. They wrote notes to each other and lowered or raised the notes between the 2 floors on a string with the help of another trustee or a jail employee. They waited until the guards weren't around and lightly tapped on the wall when they had a note to send. Carl said they wrote the notes with a writing fluid that was invisible until some heat was applied. He said they had to be careful and not catch the paper on fire with the heat. This was probably the same type of alum-based writing fluid that Church used in World War I to send classified information to his parents. Church's murder trial started at 9 a.m. Wednesday, February the 26th, 1936, in the Bledsoe County Courthouse. All day was required to select a jury. Jurors were Walter A. Lamb, Ernest Bickford, Ray Hickson, Tom Woods, Jim L. Hurd, Newt Hickson, Mike Blaylock, Isaac S. Dodson, A.P. Roberts Sr., A.P. Roberts Jr., Arthur R. McWilliams, and Lewis Simmons. The state used most of Thursday to question their witnesses and plead their case. The Attorney General for the state was Tom Stewart, assisted by Attorney O.T. Alt, B.G. McKenzie, and Tom Snodgrass. On Friday, the defense, led by attorneys Lou Pope and John Putnam, put on character witnesses and pled the rebuttal to the state's case. Parker Rice, a good friend of Church's, had been on the grand jury. At the same time, Flora swore in favor of Calhoun and against Church. Parker regretted voting to take the case against his friend to trial, but due to her testimony and influence of others on the grand jury, he went along with the decision. Several days before the main trial, Calhoun Swofford's relatives had enough political clout to have the two Solomon sisters placed in jail in protective custody to be present to testify in the main trial. This turned out to be a huge mistake. Being thrown in jail due to Swofford influence highly irritated both Flora and Evelyn. The two Solomon sisters changed their testimony to be highly in favor of church and against Calhoun. Confirmation of this is contained in a March 5, 1936 Dayton Herald newspaper article, which stated, Lester had taken the stand to testify that he'd killed Swofford and Johnson because of their alleged attack on Evelyn Swofford, 20, in his automobile. Friday, the girl had taken the stand to back up his story. The state introduced a statement allegedly made by the girl soon after her arrest as a material witness, in which she was quoted as saying she wasn't in the car at the time of the shooting and that she had not been attacked. During the main trial defense, Attorney Pope was questioning Charlie Hancock on the witness stand. Church had shot at Charlie after killing Calhoun and Coleman, but Charlie was very evasive and repeatedly testified, I don't know a thing. Pope became aggravated, and he finally asked Charlie, You're not very bright, are you? Charlie quickly retorted, I'm smart enough not to run for governor 2 times and get beat. Everyone in the courthouse broke into loud, boisterous laughter. Pope stomped the floor for 2 minutes before the laughter died down, and he regained his composure. Large crowds attended every day of the 4-day trial. Church seemed to be enjoying the process. He was often seen laughing and in a good mood. Dr. Greer was among those who testified as a character witness for Church at the trial. He testified that he'd made house calls on the Frank Lester family at Frostbite as their doctor and was highly complimentary of Church and his family. Of course, Dr. Greer could have had a strong ulterior motive for testifying in favor of Church in this case, because it was Calhoun's grandson who killed his son 3 years earlier. The case was turned over to the jury late Friday, and the jury rendered a not guilty verdict Saturday morning. Several years after Church died, Buell Swofford told Roy Swofford, Sheriff Walter Walling handpicked that jury for Church's trial. Others have said the same thing. After the jury returned the not guilty verdict, jury A.P. Roberts was reported to have said, We might as well turn Church loose if they're going to turn Buell loose for gunning down Randall Greer for no good reason. Angie Swofford was reported to have seen Calhoun's son, Jack Swofford, soon after the trial. Jack allegedly said, Wasn't it a shame Calhoun was gunned down in cold blood? If anyone wants to get away with murder, all they have to do is come to Bledsoe County. Angie fired back, saying, Yeah, just like Randall Greer was gunned down 3 years ago. Like many other people, Angie evidently believed if Buell could get away with killing Randall Greer, then Church should be able to get away with killing Calhoun Swofford. At this time, Craven Miller Tollett owned and operated a restaurant where the fire department is now located on Main Street in Pikeville. They openly sold whiskey by the drink or by the bottle, which was strictly against the law. The Tolletts were very close friends with both Church and Sheriff Walter Walling. The Tolletts likely purchased most of their whiskey from Church. The 4 of them were, as one person stated, birds of a feather. They would do just about anything for each other. Crave and White Miller Tollett were reported to have testified in favor of Church during the trial. After the trial, members of Calhoun's family were allegedly armed and outside the courthouse, waiting for Church to come outside. Tensions were running high on both sides. Sheriff Walter Walling, Crave Tollett, and White Miller Tollett were aware that the Swoffords might try to kill Church. In order to protect him, these 3 close friends were also armed. They surrounded Church as he walked out of the courthouse, past the Swoffords, and went down the street to the Tollett restaurant. You'll read in a later chapter how Church returned the favor to Crave and White Miller.